So in week 5 of Music 320, we're going to be covering a number of objects that are very important to Max. That sends and receives, the concept of subpatchers and abstractions, and we'll touch also on the multi-slider. So let's begin with subpatches. Subpatches are a way of encapsulating your code into a separate patch, which you can then pass data into and get data out of. It's kind of like designing your own Max object. The way subpatches work is that at some point in your working, you simply say patcher as an object name, and then give it some symbol which we will use to reference it. Do something. Yeah. Now, as soon as I do that, a new patcher opens up called, in brackets, do something. That's the name of this patcher. And I'm going to change the colors of it, as I always do, to something that I can, nice and easy to read. And I can put code in this subpatcher. And when I close it, all I have on the main screen is a patcher called do something. Okay? So I've created, it's kind of like a subroutine or a subpatch. Now what is in do something? Double click on it. Has to be in normal performance mode to double click on it. It opens up. And I'm going to do some calculations. Or maybe it'll be a make note object. Let's just a simple one. And a note out object on channel 1. And let's join those up. We'll just do that. And let's put a message in here. Let's put an integer box. Okay. So I've got something that makes a note that's a second long. It does something. So I can close it up and it will be embedded. Now that's not particularly useful because in order to get into that patch, I have to open it up and I have to click on it. Okay? So what we really want to do is we want to be able to pass things into our patch and get things coming, our subpatch, and get data out of our subpatch just like we would with a normal Max object. So I'm going to double click on this to open it up, and I'm going to put a new object called an inlet in here. And this has a little 1 on it, a little arrow, which means that this is inlet number 1. And if I bring in another inlet, it will call it number 2. And I'm going to make a program out. Whoops, spell it properly. Program out on channel 1. And I'm going to attach that in there. And maybe just hold my shift key down and put that in the middle of it so I can see that. Okay. And then what's happening now is I've created an inlet in my patch which will pass a value in and play it. And I've created another inlet in my patch, my subpatch, that will store or send a program number out, not to Q, sorry about that, to program number 1. Now I'm going to save this and close it. And suddenly you will see that my patcher called do something has got 2 inlets. One will send a value to the first inlet, and the other will send a value to the second inlet. Now I have to know what those inlets do. And if I'm being careful about this, I of course would type a comment in here and here. So I can remember when I open this up what in the world these do. Maybe I want an outlet. I'm going to type the word outlet. these are also can be found somewhere along here. Is it in here? In the plus, there's the inlet and the outlet. I'm just going to send a bang out here with a bang button with a B, just because every time I play a note, I just want to see something. So that's my outlet number 1. And I close this up, save the entire patch, and now I've got a outlet coming out of my patcher. Okay, so now I can put notes in here, such as 72. I can put different values in here, such as 12 to change the program. Let's play 74. A different timbre. So I've taken away some of the complexity that was going to be on my main patch, and I've created a patcher, a sub-patcher, and I've hidden away some of that complexity. This would have all been appearing on my main patch, and now it's been hidden away. Now, if I wanted to, I could make a sub-patcher that included a sub-patcher, right? So I can sort of nest these and make them as complicated and as deep as I want to. Now, because patcher is such a common thing to do, there is an abbreviated name for patcher, and that is P. So if I say P, do something else, that creates a new patcher. Okay? And I could put some code in here and put some inlets and some outlets and create a subroutine or a sub-patch. Okay, so here's a sub-patch that I created. I gave it the name sub-patch, very original. I can see that it's got an inlet and an outlet. I'm going to double click on it to open it up. And you can see that it's actually a sub-patch. It's not a very good name, sub-patch. I would call it something different. It takes a bang as an input and then generates a random number and adds 48 to that random number. And I have a second inlet which allows me to set the range of my random number generation. So if we just look at this sub-patch and see what's coming out of it, we'll see that we're getting a range of values, 24 above 48. And if I put a new value in here, such as 3, whoops, not 113, let's just put 3 in, I've now changed that range. So it gives me 48, 49, or 50. Right? So I'm just going to open that up again so you can see what that does. A little sub-patch that basically generates random numbers and allows me to set the range. I didn't save a whole lot of complexity because this wasn't too much. It was just a bang, an object, and an addition. But it's just a simple example. Okay? So that is the concept of a sub-patch. And it really is to hide away some of the complexity and to make your patches more modular, where you've basically taken sort of sub-procedures or sub-elements of code and basically modularize them and put them into a sub-patch. It also allows you to more easily do things like duplicate this. This will be an exact duplication of that, right? All the code that was in here is now duplicated in here, but they're independent of one another. So I can play pitches on this one. I can play pitches on this one. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Now, an abstraction is very similar to a sub-patch. And I think one of the issues that students sometimes get confused about is when you should make an abstraction and when you should just use a sub-patch. And the answer to that is that if you are doing something that is going to be done a lot of times, and there is some variability as to how it is going to be done, then that's a good situation for an abstraction. I know I haven't said what an abstraction is yet. So when you create an abstraction, what you do is you create a new patcher. And it just comes up, and I'm going to choose a format so I can see it. And I'm just going to make a patch that does something very similar. I'm going to make a patch that has an inlet. And that inlet is going to be a bang. I'm going to do something very similar. And then that is going to have a random. Maybe I will do an earn with some argument. Let's say 13. And remember what I need to do with an earn is that when the earn runs out of values, I go in here and I rebang it. Okay. And then I am going to, it's going to put output. Whoops, I meant to type outlet. Outlet here, connect this earn to there, and input another inlet, which is a range of values, which I can set. And then I'm going to add 48 to this. All right, and I'm using my Shift key just to insert that in the patch court. Now this is very similar to that subpatch we just looked at, which was doing random number generation, except it's using an earn. Okay, now here's where the concept of abstraction comes in. What I'm going to do is I am going to save this in my Max folder, in the same folder that I'm currently working, where I'm keeping all of my projects and all my files, somewhere where Max will find it. And this is very important, because if Max can't find my abstraction, my file, then when I try to use it, it will say, I don't know what that is. I can't find that. All right, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to save this, and this is where all of my Max work is right now, and I'm going to call it earner, and I'm going to put my own initials on the end of it, earner KH. Okay, and there it is. It's been saved. Now it is in the same folder as this file that I'm currently working on, so I know Max will find it. Okay, now I'm going to start with that, and we're just going to make some comments here, which to say bang coming in, range of values, there we go, and down here random. It's actually a unique random number coming out. And I'm just going to added to base value, which is that 48. Now, I'm assuming that I'm working on a project where I want unique random numbers to be generated, and I'm going to be doing this a lot. And that's why I've created the abstraction. If it's simply a one-off activity, a singleton, something I'm only going to do once, then there's no need to make an abstraction. If I want to encapsulate it into a subpatch, then fine. But I don't need an abstraction for it. So I'm going to save this again, and I'm going to close it. And now I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to my main patch here. I'm going to type N for a new object, and I'm going to type earner KH, and it comes up. It knows that there's such a thing as an earner KH. And when I double click on it, it opens up the earner KH that I saved on my hard drive. So we call this an abstraction. And the way earner works right now, not particularly super useful yet, but I can bang it and I'm going to get outputs that are between, I think, between 48 and 60. And there they are. All right, so that's working exactly the way I want it to work. But this doesn't have that variability aspect that I mentioned are useful for abstractions to have. So I'm going to open it up again. Now, this is very interesting because in the bottom left corner of this patch, there is a pencil. And that's because this is an abstraction that I've created. And by default, it is read-only. It's not editable. Now, I created it. Now, this is for sort of for your own protection. When you've created an abstraction and you're using it in this file and that file and some other project, you don't normally want to go in and change it because you are changing its essential code, and every place that it was used or will be used again will be now using a new code instance, right? Or it'll take its instances from this new code. So you have to be careful once you create an object that you don't just go in and accidentally change it when you've created an abstraction, that is. Okay, but I can, since I know that I want to, I can click on this and modify it so that the read-only is taken off, and now I can unlock it and I can edit it. And when I save it, it will now be saving a new version of earner KH. And any objects that are using earner KH will now be using the new version of it. What I wanted to do with this is I wanted to do what I do with all of your standard Max patches. I want to allow myself to create arguments. And I do that by replacing this number, 13, with a number sign, 1. And that means the first argument that I give to the earner KH will go in here. It'll replace that number sign 1 with whatever value I supply as the first argument. And I'm going to replace this plus 48 with number 2, the second argument. And I'm going to put a comment here, argument 1, argument 2 is base value, range and base value. I'm going to keep this in this, and I'm going to save this. And now I've got a modified earner KH. Now I have to be a little bit careful of this because, I don't know, I should have showed you. What happens when I close this is because the earner KH I opened did not have any arguments, it has a range of 0 and a base value of 0. Right? So not very useful. What I have to do is I now need to supply it with arguments. So 13 and 48. Right? So where I put 13, this instance of earner KH will have the number 1 replaced by 13, and this instance of earner KH will have the number 2 replaced by 48. And when I double click on this, I can in fact see, yes, there's 13, there's 48, and it's locked up, so I can't change it. All right, so let's duplicate that, but let's give it different arguments. Let's give it 3 and 80. 80. Look what happens when I run these. This is giving me values between 48 and, well, 13 values above it, including the 48, between 48 and 60. This one is going to give me values between 80 and 82. Okay? And I can then supply any instance of earner KH with whatever 2 arguments I want, and they will end up taking the place of those placeholders we have inside the abstraction. So I open this up and I'll see a 3 there and an 80 there. I open this up and I see a 13 there and a 48 there. Okay, so this is an abstraction. As I say, the only thing you've got to be careful of is that this needs to be in your folder. And if you've made an abstraction as part of your project, you need to send that to me as well. Because if you've made your own version of Earner KH, I won't have it. And I need to include that in the same folder in order that I can open your patch and find it. Okay? If Max doesn't find it, it'll just turn that object into a ugly brown box. Like if I just simply type no earner, that's what I'll get when I open your patch. Okay, so just to recap that briefly, subpatches allow you to take complexity and hide it away with inlets and outlets. And abstractions allow you to essentially define your own Max objects that have inlets and outlets, but also have arguments, and that those arguments can be different in different instances of those objects. Right? You can have any number of arguments you want, and you can basically, add as much complexity into your abstraction as you want. Okay? So that's subpatchers and abstractions. Very important. If you need some more examples of abstractions, there's, let's say, one here called random gen, which is just basically a random generator, and it's actually downloadable, so you can download it as well as part of this patch. It basically bangs a random number. It's an abstraction that has no arguments, so it's sort of like the first version that we created. This is just really not a particularly useful random generator because it doesn't have arguments, and it can only be used always for generating the same values. So let's leave it there, and we can deal with it next week if there are still questions about abstractions and when to use them. So sends and receives are fairly easy and very useful in Max MSP. And let me just clear out some of this. Whoops. Some of these things that I don't need in here. So instead of sending a patch cord to connect two objects, I can use a send with a name. Let's use the name Fred. Here's an I integer box going into Fred. And then somewhere else in my patch, I'm going to have a receive with the same name. And these names have to be no spaces, no really weird characters. Just use normal letters and maybe an underscore in them. And a send something to Fred and receive something to Fred is basically as if there was a patch cord going from here to here. When I type in here, it comes out there. Because sends and receives are used so frequently, there's a shortcut for them called R for receive, S for send. And there is a second receive Fred. So now the data goes to all of those. You can see in this example over here in the patch, the send set range value goes here, where it's sent to a trigger, which goes there. It goes inside this subpatch, and it also goes here. So if I put a value of 23 there, we can see the values 23 going in here, over here, and also in here. So use sends and receives, or S's and R's, with a name so it knows which one to send it to. Anytime your patches are getting unwieldy, you've started to create a bit of a spider's web on your patch. The only thing you have to be careful of is that if messaging is time critical, And it may make a difference if one receive gets the data before another receive. Then you have to be careful using sends and receives, because you can't really control the order in which messages get sent. These could be within the same patch. They might be going into a sub-patch. It could even be in a separate patcher that's open, in which there's no other way to connect these objects. All right. And then finally, the last topic is I wanted just to briefly look at multi-sliders. And this multi-slider is, this is a multi-slider object. It's a graphical depiction of data. And I'm going to move this over so you can see the console, because we're printing it. When I click on this, the data comes out, and every time I move one of these sliders, the data comes out. It comes out when I touch it and when I release it. So you can see that this whole list of data is coming out. So this is a useful way of storing data. If I happen to, it takes a list as input and a list comes out. And if I happen to change the number of elements in the list, the multi-slider changes the number of bars that are contained within the multi-slider. Okay? So it's a useful tool if you want to either just display a quantity of data, or you want to temporarily store a quantity of data. Maybe they're sort of like 4 presets that go together, and you want to be able to adjust a value and then take those 4 values out and send them somewhere. Maybe send them to an unpack and distribute them somewhere. So a useful object. There are many, 5 or 6 different ways of viewing multi-sliders. This is the bar graph version of multi-slider, but I'm going to create a new multi-slider. And I'm going to go Command I, so you can see that there's many things you can do with a multi-slider. And I'm going to set the range of this multi-slider between 0 and 20. And then I'm going to choose not the bar type, which we just looked at, but how about the reversed point scroll version of the multi-slider? I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to attach a integer box to it. And now, as I put values into my slider, you can see, it's a bit hard to see, but it's displaying points that reflect the values that I've been putting in. If I want to go, you probably couldn't see that, could you? Reverse line scroll. Now I can actually create a visualization of incoming data, whatever it happens to be, using the multi-slider. So it has that possibility, the visualization of data side of things, and it also has the ability to store a large list of data. So that's the multi-slider. Not an essential element, certainly, but you may come across instances where for some reason you want to, let's say, track the MIDI pitches that have been played and actually give a display of all of the pitches that have come in so far, or something like that. So that's week 5.1. That's a lot of important information. So feel free to watch the video a second time if some of those things didn't quite make sense. Thank you.